Hi, and welcome to Check Your Thread, a podcast about sewing more sustainably. My name's Zoe, and I'm obsessed with sewing. I've been blogging about it for over 13 years and am the creator and host of the popular handmade wardrobe challenge, Me Made May. But like many people, I've become increasingly concerned about the climate crisis and the way my lifestyle contributes to it. So in this podcast, I'll be nerding out about making clothes whilst exploring how to minimise the negative impact that it may have. I really hope you'll join me on this journey. Hello, lovely listeners. I hope you're doing well. At time of recording, we're about halfway through the Me Made May challenge. As predicted, the weather hasn't been very helpful in allowing me to fully explore my wardrobe so far, but it has taught me a fair bit so far about what I continue to lack when it's chilly. I've been playing around with different combos as per my pledge, and I've been analysing what I feel most comfortable in, and dungarees continue to be a winner for me. I've also been attacking my mending and alterations pile, so that's looking a lot less intimidating. If you're challenging yourself for Me Made May, I hope you're having an illuminating and useful month. I've received some lovely feedback from listeners about last week's episode, which was all about using sewing patterns more sustainably. Some people have said that they picked up some tips and ideas. Others have said it emboldened them to give things a try that they're a bit wary of. And others have said that they choose to do things a bit differently for various reasons. So in last week's episode, one of my arguments was that tracing patterns and keeping the original is a good plan. Off the back of that, a listener named Angie emailed me this week asking how to trace sewing patterns. So I thought that I'd respond to that question in this intro in case it's useful for other listeners. So there are a number of ways to trace a pattern. I might go into this more in a specific episode. So this is not an exhaustive explanation, nor am I claiming that this is the very best method for everyone, so don't at me. But this is my preferred way, which I would also argue is the simplest. Okay, here we go. Get a roll of really wide paper. As I said in last week's episode, you can order really large rolls of paper that will last you years, or you can use large format printer paper if you have access to it, or even thin wallpaper or wrapping paper. If the pattern you're about to trace has any creases, press it with an iron on a low heat setting with the steam function turned off. This will get rid of any creases and help you trace more accurately. A lot of the paper sold for pattern drafting is slightly transparent. If yours is, you can lay it over your original printed pattern sheet. Then pin the two layers together to stop them shifting about. Then use a sharp pencil to trace over the lines of the size that you require. I like to do this against the edge of my set square or a short ruler, but you can trace freehand if you're able to do that accurately, which I'm not. If your original pattern sheet is from a PDF, making sure you've used the layers function to remove any unnecessary sizes and lines will make this easier. If you couldn't remove the unwanted sizes, or the original pattern sheet is from a printed paper pattern, you might wish to highlight your size first in a different coloured pen perhaps, so you can make finding your lines easier. Also, make sure you transfer the grain lines, darts, notches, pocket placement guides or any other necessary markings. If the paper you have isn't transparent at all, you will need to place your original printed pattern sheet over the top of your paper. Once again, pin the two layers together. You'll need to get yourself a tracing wheel for this method. If you don't know someone to borrow one from and you have to buy one, the good ones cost between £5 and £10, but I think they're an excellent investment. Make sure you're getting the type with really sharp spikes, like the spikes from a school compass. When you use your tracing wheel, the spikes are likely to damage the surface you're leaning on, so either invest in a cutting mat also, or trace on the carpet. So with a tracing wheel, run the spikes along the size lines you need, once again also transferring the grain lines and any necessary pattern markings. The transferring happens by perforating the sheets. You'll get a feel for how hard to push pretty quickly. Then unpin the layers and remove the original printed sheet. Then you're going to need to draw over the perforations with a pencil and ruler or set square so you can see them more clearly. Some people like to use carbon paper between the layers when they're tracing, but personally I haven't had much luck with that stuff. Other people prefer to use Swedish tracing paper rather than actual paper, which is a substance somewhere in between paper and fabric. It also has the added benefit of being able to be sewn, but generally can be eye-wateringly expensive, so it's not an option for many, particularly as a long-term solution. Okay, I hope that helps, Angie. Because I've just made this intro pretty lengthy, I'm going to skip talking about my projects and sustainability wins this week. I would like to mention, however, that I was interviewed for a Smaller Life podcast recently, and that episode is up now if you'd like to listen. It's a podcast with a very similar philosophy and goals to this one, but with knitting rather than sewing as the main focus. I've put a link in the show notes. I'll be interviewing Saskia, a host of A Smaller Life, for this podcast soon, so I can grill her on knitting more sustainably. Huge big thanks this week to Jennifer, Polly and Kylie for becoming the latest patrons of the podcast via Patreon. Each and every contribution really makes a difference to the whole viability of this podcast in the long term. So if you feel you could contribute the cost of a coffee each month, or more or less, it's entirely up to you, please consider doing so. Details on how can be found by clicking the link in the show notes or via the website checkyourthread.com. Okay, today's episode. I am so excited to bring you this one. In essence, it's exactly the kind of episode I want to be making. A fun and inspiring conversation that will make you think by getting deep into some important concepts, combined with some super practical, actionable tips that we can all start to apply today. For you! And I have awesome return guest Shelly Sommer to thank. If you've heard her original episode, which was episode 19, we spoke about her garment sewing and quilting practice, and we touched on heaps of cool ideas and concepts along the way. I've wanted to get Shelly back on to explore some of those more for yonks. So in this one, we discuss one of the basic tenets of a circular economy, which is keeping materials and resources at the highest possible level of use. I'm not going to blabber on about it anymore in this intro because it all gets explained during the conversation. The show notes this week are a total link fest to all the things and people mentioned in today's episode. Enjoy! You look fabulous for 9 in the morning, may I say.
I'm faking it. I put on a sweater.
Thank you so much for doing this. Give me some more of your time.
I'm delighted.
So we had a lovely conversation before, and during our conversation, we touched on so many topics that could have gone into side tangents, and we were having to reel ourselves in a little bit because it could have gone on for a really, really long time.
Right.
So one of the concepts that we were talking about at the time is something that's been coming up, hasn't it, in the kind of recent email back and forth that we've been having. So instead of continuing to keep that discussion going on in email, let's talk about it. Let's record it. Let's make it something that hopefully some other people can enjoy.
Yes. Yeah, and it's so funny because I think when we had that first conversation, we kind of met over scraps, right? And then we wound up not really talking that much about the, the scraps. We went everywhere else.
So let's talk about highest possible level of use.
Yeah, because this concept did kind of spin out of this like little thing into this giant abstract concept. And mostly I've been thinking about it because I've been looking into the circular economy. And that was something that we chatted a little bit about.
Yes. So could you define the circular economy for those of us who heard of it and aren't quite exactly sure?
It's like, what is this? Circular sounds nice. I like circles, right? And in our current economy, it's considered quite linear. So we grab stuff out of the earth, we kind of like rip it out there, we use it up, and then we throw it away. And I think there's even a cute little line where it's like, take, make, and waste or something. So it's quite wasteful and it doesn't regenerate. And we can really see at this point the problems that that's creating with so much pollution.
Because of the sheer volume.
Exactly. And, fast fashion is something that I think a lot of folks who listen to this podcast have looked into and decided to step away from just because of that ever increasing speed. And there's injustice, there's, kind of terrible consequences for the planet and for people. So a circular economy tries to completely change that. So rather than having a resource just move straight through the system and out the other end and become, metaphorically, something you might not want in your economy, it goes circular. So when a resource enters the economy, it stays in that economy and it's actually regenerated perhaps over and over. And so there's never waste and we wind up kind of ameliorating all of these injustices. And so I've been reading about that for a while. The work of William McDonough, who's an architect who put together this cradle to cradle certification, I think first got me kind of interested because I saw a lecture that he gave. But I've really been looking into the work of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And it's lovely because they put together these wonderful guides to a circular economy. So you can see, oh, yeah, I see what that is. And she says there's kind of 3 principles. One is you design out pollution and waste. That's something that we in the sewing world really think about a lot, right? It's like, how do we use up our scraps?
Yeah. For example, maybe zero waste sewing patterns, for example. Yeah.
Right. And then the next principle is like keeping things at their highest level of use. So that's where we get to today's conversation. Yes. Yeah. And what I like about that is like, if you just recycle something, that is great. It is way better than going to the landfill. But to really make things circular, you kind of want them to maintain their quality for a long time.
Yeah.
Because it just takes energy and inputs to get something kind of back to useful when it's broken down to not that useful.
Yeah. And to recycle something can sometimes take almost as much energy.
It can.
And create as much waste as extracting virgin resources again.
Yeah, well, not as quite as much waste, but it's a lot of energy. Like plastic recycling is quite difficult. It's not easy.
It's not the answer that often it's portrayed.
Exactly. Like I'd love to recycle all of the textiles that, really aren't up to being useful anymore. But, the fact is it's just difficult to recycle mixed fiber materials. And there's whole systems in play. It's like, well, it's hard for me to change that whole system. But
yeah. But what can we do?
What can we do, right? So I think it's really interesting to kind of look at that highest level of use idea.
Yes.
When I'm sewing and in my sewing room, and then kind of spiral out from there.
Yeah. So how do you feel that you have personally explored or applied the concept of highest level of use?
Right. It's definitely kind of come behind, I would say, the design out waste for me. So I started by kind of refurbishing thrift store clothes is how I started sewing. I think I was keeping things at a higher level of use without necessarily realizing that, putting those words to it, right? But it's like, here's this dress that's short enough for a very short person or a very old person about their very nice legs. And I'd add something to that and then I could wear it for years. Yeah. It was great. So now I really think of it when it comes to fabric and clothing. So the best thing that I could do when I'm creating a garment is actually make sure that I really want it and will really wear it. And then I try to create it a way that'll really last.
Right.
So part of that is I use fabric that I think is going to stand the test of time, but a lot of it is seam finishes. So I love to use French seams and, really kind of seam finish in some way that it's going to last through the wash a bunch. I always pre-wash my fabric so it's not going to shrink when I'm finished with my lovely garment and then it's suddenly my sister's size.
Oh, we've all been there.
Exactly. So that's kind of one thing. And then it's like, if I outgrow it, maybe I could swap it. Borrowing is a good thing to do. So then it's not changing state, right? It's just kind of circulating through the world.
Yes. It's moving sideways rather than down.
Yeah. And maybe that's the whole point here. It's like if you kind of visualize things on like higher level, lower level, you just kind of want things to stay up here on the top of your graph and like not slide down, or at least slide down a little slower. So
yeah. And ultimately the bottom of that is landfill, I would say,
Exactly. And really, if this was perfectly circular, so basically you go through, you can repair it. So that's keeping it at a nice high level, or refurbish it. You can refashion it, bring it back up to a level. You could thrift it, which is like, oh, well, I feel like that should be higher level, but we all know that's not really the case most of the time.
Sadly, yeah, because of the volume and because of so many other factors.
Yeah, it's like I would love to do it if somebody like myself finds it and adopts it, and I would hate to do it if it winds up in a desert somewhere, dumped out by the side of the road.
Yeah, that's the kind of point that I was making with my previous guest, Rebecca Evans-Merritt.
Yes.
And we were kind of saying, like, what do you do with a garment that you don't want? And we're like, okay, first things first, do we physically know anyone in our family or group of friends that will love it and will use it? Because you've got some control there, haven't you, when it kind of then goes beyond that.
Harder to say, right?
Yeah.
I thought that's a really good point. And hopefully, like, what I'd love to do is I've been moving towards natural fibers, and thanks to your guests and thoughts, natural fiber threads. So the idea might be, instead of discarding a piece of clothing at the end of its life when it's really like you just can't wear it anymore, it's complete shreds. Maybe you could use it as stuffing. Maybe you could compost it. I mean, that would be the ultimate circular thing, because the third principle that MacArthur Foundation talks about is actually regenerating natural systems. So you kind of put energy and nutrients back in instead of extracting them.
Yes.
It's like, wow, don't we want to live there?
Yes.
That sounds more fun.
We do. That's so interesting. There's lots of levels there, and there's lots of opportunities for those of us who make our own clothes to explore, really, isn't there? Because I think, as I've said many times, when I ask people, so how much of your wardrobe is me made? It's not necessarily because I have this belief that that's the best case scenario, that everyone should have a me made wardrobe. making your own clothes is not the most sustainable way to dress, for sure. It's like, as you were saying, it's thrifting things. It's keeping them in that same level rather than getting the resources. But, I mean, you're not going to stop us from making our own clothes.
That's right.
And as Louisa Owen Sonstrom said in the kind of hand stitching episode, which kind of really hit me to my core, it's like, we're makers.
Yes.
Like, humans create. Like, that is something that is so integral to us. And it's so, I mean, so many of us, you know, we get so many mental health benefits. You know, there's so much that we don't want to lose by saying, you know what, this isn't really a great activity for the planet. But what can we do? What can we do? There's lots of opportunities to find better ways, isn't there? And by thinking about this kind of high level of possible use it's really exciting, I think. Yeah.
I love that take on it because it's true. I mean, we are creators and makers. And if we deny that, actually, that's a lot of humanity, and that's that we're getting rid of. I don't think that's probably a good plan. It's just that the system we're in is such a mess.
Yes.
So it's like, well, if we could actually use this creativity and we could keep things at these higher levels and just start to tinker with that system and see about testing its limits, like that's exciting to me. And it means that we can keep making thoughtfully and intentionally and like really get that out there, and it does good.
Yeah.
So
yes. So how are we going to do that?
Yeah. So I think, you know, individually, it's kind of fun just to apply that little bit of filter to what we're doing. I know I did that when I actually donated some fabric this past year that I had acquired in my first 6 months of like, buy all the things. Like I've totally been there. If you have stashes where it's like, I don't know why I bought this fabric. I work with climate scientists. I was a minimalist, you know, in sort of horrible quotes because I'm not, but I don't know why. So I finally gave it away, and I found organizations like the Social Justice Sewing Academy or a group of sewists on the Navajo Nation where the closest fabric store is pretty far away. And I could send it there and know that it would get great use. My guild would have fabric exchanges once in a while, and that was really nice too because I could.
Oh, lovely!
People only took things if they wanted it, and I feel like just kind of thinking about that when I'm getting rid of something, or when something's worn out, or what do I do with a piece of fabric? This is why I make scrap quilts. I don't consider myself a scrap quilter necessarily. Like I don't like to cut fabric to make patchwork quilts unless it's really scrap.
Yes.
That is totally personal. I know, like, that is not any kind of judgment I would place on other people because patchwork quilts are awesome and it's just like my quirk, but it's kind of because I think like I want to keep these fabric pieces as big as possible. The flip side of that is actually that's why I'm excited about making little tiny scrap collages, despite the kind of weird effort they take. It's like, it's actually really fun, and it brings something up from a lower level to a higher level, and that feels really good, right?
And I think that's where we came in, wasn't it? That's where our kind of relationship came in, because I saw on your Instagram feed these stunning kind of mini quilts in a way, weren't they? I'm assuming they're that size, I don't know. And you pieced them together from literal scraps.
Right.
And something in me clicked. I was like, that's incredible. Like, that is just genius, because we have all these funny little bits and they stress us out.
Right.
Well, they stress me out, sure. And there's only so many.
And they are too small.
Yeah.
They're not useful. There's only so many, like, I don't know, button backs or whatever that you want to make out of your scraps. And we all have, you know, it's an inch square. It's like,
it's a weird shape. It's a triangle or something.
Little tiny strips. Yeah, like I had strips that if I ordered a piece of fabric and it came tied in a little ribbon of fabric, I would throw it in the bin. So yeah, these have been fantastic. And I love the thought that they take something that's really useless and could only go to stuffing. So the best case scenario is you could make stuffing out of it and make food for a stuffed animal. And that's pretty cool. But I feel like there's more potential. And like bringing it up a notch, it just helps me make the decision to do that, I guess.
So you've been making these beautiful little things, and then you've been using those to patch garments when you're mending. Is that right? Right. So I've patched kind of tears in shirts where the fabric gets really thin from use or the sun. We've used it for, what else? I did use it for a border on something. Oh, cool.
Just kind of put a border around where I needed some extra space. And now the little squares that you saw they're cut to be 6.5 inches across. So when you sew them together, they're 6 inches square. like, those will just be a quilt. So I just pulled another one off last night. I have 31 piled up.
Whoa!
Which is like,
really?
it's a couple feet, but 2.5 to 3 feet if you mix it in with other fabric.
That's going to be stunning.
I think it'll be fun.
Yeah.
And I really try to make them as beautiful as I can. But essentially they're just trash. It's come up a notch. It's got above itself in the world.
It's got above its station.
Exactly. I'm trying to like have a Be Nouveau where you should just shoot up the ladder. Now you've been working on some patchwork too, haven't you? I
have. So I have been working on really kind of like playing with these ideas. This podcast is just an endless source of inspiration for me, because every time I speak to someone, my mind just gets exploded in some ways. And then it all starts to link together. So, for example, when I think I mentioned this before, when I was talking to Ricardo from the Sewing Bee, and he was talking about how he doesn't get rid of clothes. He always keeps them because he can reuse them or remake them or harvest the fabric from them. And my reaction to that was like, who's got the space?
Exactly.
And then, I didn't say that was what I was thinking. And then I was realizing I store clothes in my wardrobe that I'm not using. I'm doing that. Like, it's not deliberate, but I'm doing that. And I just realized, like, I've got a bunch of stuff here. I'm looking here because I'm in my bedroom. Like that I don't use. And then I realized that I had 2 garments that I made using this denim that I just adore. Like, I really am obsessed with this kind of denim called broken twill denim. So it's like the denim that Wrangler used. So whereas you look at the normal twill weave of denim, it's like diagonal, isn't it?
Right.
Where broken twill is like tiny W's.
Oh, neat.
It's kind of got a really 70s vibe, and I'm obsessed with that kind of denim. And they had some at the fabric place that I work a number of years ago. And I bought a couple of meters or 3 meters or whatever. Made myself a pair of wide leg trousers. Loved them, wore them a ton. I had enough to make myself a little Clio pinafore dress as well. Didn't wear that so much. But then after my second child, like, I didn't really fit into the trousers anymore. Knew that wasn't going to change. The belly's here to stay. So I realized I've got these 2 garments in my wardrobe from fabric I adore, sitting there doing nothing. So then I realized, like, yes, like, let's harvest that back. So I cut both of them up, laid them out. It's quite a sizable, because wide leg trousers, they're quite wide, aren't they? You can get quite a lot. So I've then recently used it to make my son a pair of dungarees, which he's wearing today. And I'm going to post them soon. So I managed to get some photos whilst he was in them. And then I've still got bits. Yes. And I've got the cool bits where the pockets have been taken off and it's got that shadow. I just love that. And then I've got all these other bits that left over from many denim projects. And I was thinking, if I can put them together, that could make the world's most awesome pair of dungarees.
Oh, for sure. And how much cooler would they be than just virgin fabric that,
Yeah, and I'm really excited because it's exciting for a lot of reasons. It's exciting because, I'm really getting the most I can from these garments of the fabric that I love. And also I'm pairing it with other bits from other projects. So it's almost like a kind of like, oh, that's that from that's from that. But then also, like, the whole process is super fun and it's super experimental and there's no rules, and unless you make rules.
Right,
like I've
for yourself.
Make rules. Yeah. Like, I'm trying to roughly keep it on the grain.
Yeah.
That's all I've decided upon. Like,
I love that.
And then how I piece them together. And so I'm having an awesome time. And, like, it's a long-term project. I'm not like just focusing on that. Whenever I've got a bit of time, and because I get all my bits out and do another section. But thanks to you, thanks to when the last time we spoke and I asked you who you inspires you, and you mentioned the quilter Sherilyn Wood. So then I started following her on Instagram, and she posted about some workshops that she's been hosting recently online. The first one was a free, well, you could donate to the Gee's Bend Quilt Association. I don't know if that's what it's called, but I'll put a link in. I'll get the right name and I'll put the link in. But ostensibly, it was a free workshop that you could come, and she was doing a kind of workshop called Scrap Play. And I was like, that's what Shelly's been talking about. That's what Shelly does.
It's true.
And that's for me was kind of like a missing link, really, because it's like, how then? How does that look? So I was very lucky enough to get a spot on this workshop, and she talked about how she pairs colours. She's got a lot of scraps.
She does.
So she was talking about selecting a colour palette and then how she decides which bits should go where. And she was like at pains to say, this is how I do it.
Right.
This is like what I've decided for this particular project. She called it her algorithm. Like, this is how I'm personally going to organize this, but you can do whatever. And it was really fascinating. And it's like we said, watching people do their thing, like it's really cool. So I have you to thank, because I never would have even known about it if it had not been for you. So thank you. So that was completely eye-opening. So she was showing us how you could place fabric together and kind of whip it up, and she was doing it so quickly. That was what was very cool as well, because I always think of like quilt making as a really long term considered. She just made it so doable, and it made me think of all those people that are really time poor and just want to just get the joy of making but don't have
space,
the space as well that requires to kind of plan it all out. She was just and it grew at an amazing rate, and it was so inspiring. She had this bit of fabric. It could be a quilt top, it could be a cushion cover, it could be a bag, it could be a garment. Like it could be
a great jacket.
Yes. Yeah. Or it could be a part of a garment. It could be the back of a garment or the lining. It could be a crazy lining,
Yeah. I love it. And I think that's the power of the algorithmic approach that she uses, is like, because she's got a couple rules in her head that she's made for herself, she doesn't have to make a ton of decisions.
Yes.
She's going through. I think that's really helpful when you're doing just like scrap patchwork. You're just like, okay, well, it's going to be, if I see too many blues, I'm going to stick in another color. Like, that's it. It just kind of keeps you moving.
Yeah.
So, cool.
And that was kind of, in a sense, I was a bit like with your beautiful scraps that you were making, because you tend to, you're very drawn to blues and the pop of bright colours anyway, aren't you, in your own making? So your scraps were kind of forming that. So when you were creating that, were you just like randomly, blindly grabbing at scraps, or were you being quite considered with which ones you were selecting?
Oh, that's a really good question. When I'm in the moment, what I tend to do is divide the scraps just by size. So it'll be sort of like little bits, little bigger bits, medium bits, and then these long strips. So what I tend to do is just grab, like you say, my color choices are pretty consistent. So lots of dark blue, lots of kind of dark greens, teals, pops of other colors. So I'll just kind of put two scraps together. There's probably always a blue one in the mix. So I'll tend to grab like a blue one and another one and stick them together. And then I'll just chain piece them. So I'll put half a dozen through the machine and then grab the end and kind of slice off the little bits. And then for the next one, I'll probably put a blue one on because it's still majority blue. And then the next one, it'll be another color, and then it'll be blue again. And it'll roughly alternate. And they just kind of grow.
So at this point, you've literally just got like a literal chain of like two pieces. And then do you like snip them apart?
Yeah. So I'll take sort of the long part of the chain, snip them apart. So I'll have sort of this little pile of them, and then just grab them in one at a time and put them through the machine again. So the chain is always kind of there, but I'm always pulling pieces off the end. And then it's 3 pieces.
So 2 becomes 4?
2 becomes, sometimes, if they're really looking, if they kind of land together, I'm like, oh, that's nice. And I'll just slide them through. Or I can just add one on to the end. So I get kind of a bar of little squares if they're all about the same size. Or if I feel like, well, that's kind of all I have of that size, I'll go to the medium pile and put one kind of across. So they have the seam that goes down now has a bar across it. So it's kind of a T shape.
Okay. Yes. Yeah.
So I'll put those through. And so they tend to mutate a bit individually. Like they start out all pairs, and then some are triads and some are rows and some are like, I'll just start sewing them together when I think, oh, look, they both kind of got straight lines here.
So how much consideration do you give to like the thickness of the fabrics that you're selecting?
Not very much, I have to say.
Right. No, that's interesting. That's good. Yeah. No, that's very freeing to know that.
Yeah, I really don't. So the only reason that I think the fabric thickness could be important is if the fabric is pretty fragile, it can wear out before the other pieces on either side. So especially if it's a garment or if it's a quilt that you tend to wash a lot because it gets a lot of daily wear. Mm-hmm. Like a vintage piece, especially because it's already got so much wear on it, can rip up. And, you can repair that, but
you don't want to know that's going to happen.
I don't want to build it in, right? Yeah, I don't want to build in the waist, right? Design out the waist. So yes, I'll tend to interface those a bit if I'm going to use them, and just make sure it's strong. Like I won't use, my grandmother gave me some beautiful pillowcases. I've used a lot of them in patchwork, but they're pieces that I just composted because they were so thin, were never going to hold up. So that's, I have a little sentimental piece and that's it.
Oh,
yeah. But the seams actually do a lot to hold it together. So the fabric that you get, I say, doesn't have a drape like a rayon. Obviously, it's going to be a bit stiffer. But it's not really stiff. I mean, it's a nice kind of heavier shirt material or jacket, light jacket kind of weight. So yeah, you want to have something pretty useful.
And a lot of those kind of things, they really lend themselves to this kind of current trend of kind of quilted jackets, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because it almost doesn't really how thick. I mean, you can't have it super thick, can you? But it's kind of almost irrelevant as long as it's kind of light to medium weight, because you can then back it with quilting, wadding, and a lining as well, can't you?
Exactly. And I think you would want to back it with some kind of lining, even if you didn't use the quilting one would be fabulous, because then you'd have this great quilted jacket. And instead of having kind of a geometric pattern, you'd have this wonderful kind of fracture color blocks.
Yeah.
But at least some kind of lining to cover all the little seams, and just to make sure when it gets washed and things like that it's going to hold up is probably a good plan.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. Yeah. But there's so many options, because you don't have to necessarily line it. You could what's it called? Underlining, when you then use maybe a bit of fabric you're not that enamored with, like it's going to be on the inside. That could be a good use to use some of the fabric we bought in that first 6 months of crazy sewing, buying, manic.
Exactly.
Yeah, and then you could treat those two layers as one almost, couldn't you? And do some sort of nice, maybe binded finish or bound finish. Or something like
and, and any quilting you do or lining that you do like that is going to help hold it together and just help make it durable. And then you'll have something really special.
Yeah. I'm so inspired. I'm so inspired by this.
And it's been interesting, because it does make me, I have a fabric stash. It's bigger than some people's, it's smaller than other people's, but I have stuff. I have lots of stuff to refashion. It takes up space and energy too. Sometimes I like to make something that's from, fabric I had cut out. But I try to kind of alternate things. So that way I kind of stay on top of the scraps and I don't get more than a box full. If I have more than this box full, I'm going to be in trouble. So I need to it just kind of keeps me working on different fronts. And that's interesting too.
Yeah. So just going back to something that you were saying before, kind of it really struck when you were just saying it previously about how you don't like to cut into a big piece of fabric to make smaller shapes for a quilt. If you use scraps, you want them to be scraps. And it was interesting because during the Sherilyn Wood workshop, there was a chat box open and people were kind of chipping. There was hundreds of people attending. I don't know if attending is the right thing, but and it was interesting. Some people were saying like, "Oh, I don't know, like what fabric to use," and some people were like, "Oh, just get some fat cords and cut into them." And I was like, and I had this like really weird reaction, like, "What are you doing? No, this is our chance to use scrap."
It's brand new.
Yeah, and I was like, "This is our chance, people."
Don't you?
And I ended up putting in the chat box like, quilters need to buddy up with garment sewers, because garment sewers, they've got scraps,
man,
and they don't need them all. So I wonder, could you imagine if there was some kind of some sort of enterprise that literally buddied up quilters,
scrap exchange,
and or even, it doesn't even have to be exchanged. You can literally just go in one direction from the garment sewers to the quilters. We don't want them back. We don't want them back. Or maybe eventually you'll get a beautiful quilt back. That would be nice.
Maybe. Yes, I'm still trying to find a knitter to pair up with, because I feel like quilt sweater.
That would be
but I do kind of love that. I mean, this idea is really one of stewardship, and it's like, well, we could work together on that, isn't it?
Yes, and that would be keeping it, I mean, the way I see it, that would be keeping it horizontal, as we were saying. That's moving it across. It's not moving it up or down.
Right. Like when you generate something, then it can move, but it's like the resource. You are resourcing it. You are literally getting a new source. It's so lovely. And I love the idea of making it more cooperative, right? Because really, capitalism tries to make us nothing but consumers. We consume.
Yes.
I love that idea. Like, if we can share and cooperate and put stuff together, that kind of seems a little rebellious. I like it.
I love it. I love your little rebellious streak.
Rebellious streak. Well, here's the thing. Almost every faith tradition that we have, or religion or philosophy around the world, really recognizes stewardship as a central tenet, right? So like, what is our job on this planet?
Right.
It is to nurture and to caretake, right? So it is our job to care for the world and the creatures and the things that are in it in some form or other. That's pretty common. Like, it's really only capitalism that makes us owners or owned, exploiters, consumers, where it's considered not just okay, but even virtuous to like extract stuff and use it up and then discard it. What the hell? I mean, by any other...
which is all a construct.
It's a powerful construct that we are living in the middle of, but when you think about it, kind of by any other standard in the world, like, it's not just wasteful, it's kind of morally reprehensible. I don't know. So we can break it down with our little patchworks.
Yes. I feel like this then needs to be another conversation in a few months' time.
Wouldn't that be fun?
I love it. Okay, great. So let's just do a quick summary of what we were talking about. So highest level of possible use is, correct me if I'm wrong, it's keeping the resources that we have already extracted in use as long as possible and not... No, I've gone.
No, you're good. So yes, it's just like keep them at the highest possible place of level of utility and beauty and usefulness.
Utility. That's a very interesting word. Yes.
And just keep them doing their thing as long as you can, and try to slow down or boost up again to when it sort of falls down a level. So, try to keep things in play.
So think if there's a way to keep things up or sideways.
Yeah. And
and that could be a fabric swap. It could be donating things that we have that we no longer want, but finding, not just hoping that they land in the right hands, but really kind of being responsible for making sure that those things find homes that genuinely will use it, and they're not going to sit there. So like you were saying, like, you found some really good you found some recipients for fabric you no longer wanted that were going to use it as fabric. And that does two things. It means that then they don't have to spend money on stuff, which may be hard to come by for many people. And also it prevents them from having to extract, or not prevent, it means that they don't then need to extract or be responsible for the extraction of more virgin resources. It fills the need. So that's really super exciting. And that's something that we can all do.
But it does. It makes us better stewards. Like, and I really don't know how to do sewing without any waste whatsoever. I don't think that's possible right now, but I can sure be a better steward. Yeah. And, I think we can all, that's something for us to work on. It can only help out.
Yes, I love it. Okay, thank you so much.
Zoe, this was such a fun conversation. I love talking with you.
Thank you so much.
We'll look forward to next time.
Thanks so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed this episode and are left feeling inspired. For more info about the podcast, including show notes for this and every episode, head to checkyourthread.com. I'd love to hear from you, so if you have any comments, questions or ideas for future episodes, please get in touch by emailing zoe@checkyourthread.com or find me on Instagram @checkyourthread. Massive thanks to Patrick Potter for production support, to Sylvia Seller for the awesome logo design, and to Simon at Palm Skin Productions for the music. This ad-free podcast would not be possible without listener support, so if you feel you are able, please consider signing up to the Check Your Thread Patreon. For the equivalent of buying me a coffee each month, you'll be making it possible to continue producing regular episodes. Links can be found in the show notes and on the website checkyourthread.com. I hope you'll listen again next week. Until then, take care. Bye!